かがですか? Watanabe Dan desu. On today's episode of Hollywood Rants, we're going to be talking about the state of the entertainment industry as it stands fourth quarter of 2020. Let's get to a troubling question. Now, it's not really troubling, it's just one that I find interesting, and that is, what is the most important new innovation in this world of streaming? Is it Netflix or is it YouTube? And I've had many discussions with not only my friends within the industry, but my students over which they feel is the most relevant in terms of where the industry is going in the future. Now, I'm going to side a lot more strongly with some of the older executives, ironically, and some of the younger people who are breaking into the industry now, and say that the real wave of the future is coming out of YouTube. And what do I mean by that? Do I mean that we're going to have individual content creators go out there and invade old school medium and that you're going to really see PewDiePie do feature films? Absolutely not. No, what I mean by that is that all of the entertainment industry things have always started among the innovators, the people who had chutzpah, the people who were willing to go out there and risk, not the people who were already part of the system and were rather ossified in their position. We can even look at that in terms of show business, entertainment industry, film-oriented was at the very beginning, when you had the actual Edison company trying to control the way content was going to be made. And then you had a bunch of people who would eventually be the founders of Hollywood stealing equipment and running across the country one step ahead of the Pinkerton detectives and recreating the business models that would become show business. This is where I think YouTube is ahead. I'm not saying that the content creators are going to graduate into mainstream media. Instead, they are creating a whole different medium, in the same way that radio came out of the people who had crystal sets. And in the same way, paleo television lent itself to people who were the entrepreneurs coming in, like Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, and creating a business out of something that had been more or less kind of a faddish high-end toy for the wealthy in the neighborhood. It helped it move forward. Ditto for the coming of home video. The early days of home video were largely supplied by, okay, we won't mention the porno side, although that was there too, but independent, low-budget film creators who created a hunger for content that was new but still cheap. And YouTube has that down, because what YouTube has done is, even though Google is still in the red on YouTube because of some of its own internal things that are going on, as well as the fact that it needs a bazillion servers in order to keep everything that's been created on it for as long as however, and so far it's been until something is actually pulled down, it's there. Outside of that, Google is not paying up front for great chunks of its content. Rather, it's getting the content for free and then backward monetizing certain of the creators. So they're not putting out great chunks of money. And we can see the success of that formula because look at what happened with Quibbly. Quibbly tried to do what YouTube was already doing successfully, but trying to do it where people would not only pay for it, but would be getting the same kind of content that we're getting everywhere else with the same tired group of people, only in a shorter format. Why would anyone invest the billions in it except for the fact that everyone was log rolling people that they felt were avant-garde when they were actually representing the very last stages of the ancien regime, mainly the Jeffrey Katzenbergs and Meg Whitmans of the world, who were a big thing when they were younger, but now are trying to follow a trend and improve on it rather than creating the next trend. Now, why am I sounding like I'm bashing Netflix? Because Netflix is certainly a pioneer in creating high-end content, and a lot of it is among the best stuff that's ever been created for a more or less television-like platform. I say more or less because with flat panels, you've got a much better resolution and a much better and a much larger screen to paint your images on than old school NTSC secretly 240i images. So yes, it does have a bigger canvas, but it's still not doing anything really that different from HBO. The one innovation Netflix has is that it allows you to binge watch right away instead of having to create your own catalog of all the episodes in a season and then binge watch it after the season is over. No, you have to do it. You can actually do it right away. But that, in addition to being a great innovation on the part of Netflix, has been its #1 cause for trouble. Because unlike even HBO with its high-end programming, when Netflix drops an entire series, although it's not 22 episodes, it's usually between 6 and 10, there's no going back and fixing something. When you have something that is showing 1 episode a week, if something goes really wrong on something that's already proven to be relatively successful, you can actually start tweaking the episode for next week, very little bit, but you can start doing damage control. By the 3rd week out, you can actually reshoot almost the entire episode, or repurpose the footage, or shoot enough to where you can get it to conform more to what should happen. That way you can prevent a disaster from happening. Now, I'd like to say that HBO could have actually stepped in and done that with their last season of Game of Thrones, but they were too obsessed with the merger with AT&T to be really paying attention to their day-to-day operations. So they absolutely blew it, but we'll get to that more a little bit later. The challenge that Netflix has is that it's too much of a good thing. And not only is it too much of a good thing, but it's such a too much of a good thing that you can't find its gems naturally. You do find them through the old school traditional way of word of mouth. But with over 600 series that are currently sitting there on the channel, how do you even know what to look for? One of the benefits of curated content, meaning old school type networking programming, meaning old school type cable programming, where a network would set up a schedule competitive with maybe their other networks and all that, but they'd set up a schedule. And within that schedule, they would have their gems intermixed with their cheaper stuff. I'm not saying the cheaper stuff was necessarily bad, but it was financially efficient so that the network could afford to spend a lot of money on its premium programming and have it separated out by documentaries, news shows, and reality series. And audiences surfing through would stop on some of these other pieces of content and actually like them, and they would build their own followings from there or go away. In the streaming world, yes, Netflix is very good about having a lot of information about the individual subscribers. But with that, even with their recommendations, it still requires the subscriber to make an active choice and pick what they want to watch. So there's not a lot of ways for them to find something that's truly different. And you might say, well, YouTube is even worse at that. Yes, but remember, YouTube's not paying for its programming until later, until it's actually been proven a success, and that's after the fact. This is before the fact, so that means that they're spending a lot of money on programming that you have no way of knowing if it's going to be successful or not, no matter how it algorithmically fits with what they think their audience wants. Add to that, the way Netflix got its real foot in the door in the industry is the same way Carolco did as a film company back in the late 80s, early 90s. And the way Carolco did it is it started paying outrageous amounts of money for its talent. Most infamously, Sylvester Stallone, who was the first actor to get a $20 million a picture thing. That immediately put Carolco on the map. And they followed that by being audacious enough to release First Blood in over 2,000 theaters, and in an era when a wide release was considered 500 or so prints. So they were gambling a lot, and it worked. And so they became the high-end company, and they became infamous when they would spend $100 million, 1990s dollars, on Terminator 2, and that ploy worked as well. But look what happened with Carolco. Between the time it made Basic Instinct and Terminator 2, and just 3 or 4 years later, it managed to squander that fortune on Showgirls and Cutthroat Island and went out of business. So this is a very dangerous ploy to pay people more than the market will bear. And with Netflix paying a premium price for everyone in a production, and that includes the accountants. I'm not knocking accountants, but I'm saying that if you pay people way above the average rate, yes, you're going to get a lot of the top people, but you're also putting yourself at risk if you don't know how that money is going to be made back. And what Netflix did is it did its initial challenge too well. What do I mean by that? I mean their initial challenge was to get rid of the biggest window in among the many windows between a theatrical release and the time it's rerun at 3 o'clock in the morning on television. And what they did is they got rid of the theatrical window, I mean of the home video window. And in the process of getting rid of the home video window, yes, they won against Blockbuster, which had the chance to buy them and then didn't, stupidly. But what they did with that is they created a world where now they were the only people who had the money to buy their product. Plus, they have long-term deals with a lot of the deals they make with independent producers or with producers. So that means that we're now living in a one-window universe, but still behaving as if it's multiple windows. And where that has caused Netflix trouble is that as long as it was the darling, because it created a new business model, things were fine. Now there's Disney Plus. Now there's all the other streaming services. And while Netflix has hegemony in the sense that if people are only going to have one service, they're more than likely to have Netflix rather than the others. And even though during the COVID era in Q3, they managed to get more subscribers than all the other services combined, they're still underperforming a little bit. Plus, they are now faced with a lot of their legacy, older content disappearing into those individual other services. So all they have going for them now is their original content. And there's a challenge that's coming from that, in that their original content isn't necessarily performing as well as they would like. Now, last year, I made it through The Haunting of Hill House, which I thought was absolutely horrendous. And this year, I've been trying to make it through The Haunting of Bly, which we all know is a remake of Turn of the Screw. No comparison to The Innocents, or only slightly better than the Patsy Kensit TV movie version of the 90s. And it is bad. It's boring. It's multiple episodes over an unsurprising story. It completely misses the point of the original Henry James story, which is its ambiguity. And so it's a dumbed down version of something that was a short story. And it's spread out into multiple episodes. So it can't possibly maintain your interest. The same with the remake of Rebecca, where you're taking an Alfred Hitchcock classic movie based on an old book by Daphne du Maurier, which in turn, even though it was a bestseller 90 years ago, almost 90 years ago, shows its age. It doesn't necessarily play as well in the post O.J. Simpson and Me Too movement era. And even though the new version tries to address it, it suffers from miscasting. Here you have Armie Hammer trying to play as if he's an English lord, and he's anything but. Not saying he's a bad actor. I'm saying he's wrong for the role. And so you have an unnecessary but very expensive looking movie being made that nobody asked for. And I don't think it's actually gotten that many views. this is the problem Netflix is having, is that because it doesn't have any revenue stream other than getting new subscribers based on the success of a show, how are they maintaining budgets that often are in excess of 10 million an episode for series that have 6 to 10 episodes, which means that in order to get the 100 episodes that you normally have for a long syndication life, you're going multiple years of this. You're going multiple years of constantly spending. And what if you end up with something that doesn't work after a couple of years? You've now eaten several $100 million with a dead asset. And with a lot of the Netflix shows, people give up by episode 3. And so even if you only shot 6 and you only completed 6, that still means you have 3 episodes at 10 million each that are never going to even hope to recoup it. They have not brought in the additional subscribers to have justified that cost. I actually believe, and I didn't think this was going to happen a year ago, or when I first started being really aware of just how precarious Netflix's position was, but I think it's going to happen now. I think they need to be bought because I think their financial house is going to start imploding, and they've got too much content that has no place to go. So I'm seeing someone who has deep pockets from another area either buying them out or making a merger deal with them or something like that. I would look to an Apple or perhaps an Amazon, which admittedly they have their own platforms, but look at Apple's. I mean, how many subscribers does that have? And you had the morning show with their major league female talent basically being a complete disaster. So they're probably not looking at being able to even knock on the door of Netflix. You could say Disney, except Disney's already in trouble because of the money they spent in other areas, and we'll get to that too in a bit. So I think Netflix, in spite of the fact that it's created in many ways a creative renaissance, is probably going to be a little bit troubled. Now, let's talk about something that is good news, and that is what is happening with the Writers Guild and their loss and their fight against the big talent agencies. At least for now, the Writers Guild has prevailed in a big way. And in an unthinkable turn of events, the Writers Guild has been able to destroy packaging, at least on the showrunner/writer level. Now, the agencies are still threatening that they're going to force packaging in terms of actors. But I actually think, unless the Screen Actors Guild has completely cucked out, that they're going to join the Writers Guild, because certainly they've seen what's been happening in terms of the performing side, which is that you have a lot of performers, not at the A+ tippy top level, but on the more down market levels, finding themselves being stuck in a career space where they're not really making a lot of money. They have not really advanced too much from their positions a decade ago. And this is especially frustrating when you saw how much money was going to the agencies in terms of their percentage of budget and then their back end profit participations, which if you want to cut to the chase on this, a profit participation that an agency has from putting together a package is coming from one place only, and that is the talent they represent. This is something that the managers fell into in a big way in the 90s, and it ended up destroying big chunks of the management business when even though they could officially be content producers, got them to be spending a lot of money on deficit financing and ran them bankrupt. So whenever you're taking the money away from talent, karma has a way of catching up with you. And that is what has been happening on the agency side. You've seen all of the agencies hemorrhaging personnel. And there's always this hope that they will be brought back when things get back to normal. Doesn't look like things are going to get back to normal in a time frame that's going to be good for them. And certainly the fact that the investment bankers of the hedge funds that were banking on the agencies being able to be content producers by being able to leverage their talent into projects that they were making themselves, until somebody pointed out, oh, you still have this 1962 MCA decree, which says you as a talent agency cannot do this. And somehow the Beverly Hills lawyers never noticed that. I'm going to say the Beverly Hills lawyers have been telling them all along, you can't do this. And they probably said, yes, but we owe these people a lot of money, and we actually need to go through with an IPO that we know will never make it past the SEC because it's a violation of the law, in order to get these people off of our back. And when you tell somebody that you have basically lied to them by telling them that you're going to be doing productions when you knew that you couldn't, that sooner or later your feet are going to be put in that tub of cement and be thrown in the LA River, right? Thank God the LA River is shallow. But that's really what was going on there. And so now the agencies, I think, are going to be in the same position that they were in the 90s when they found themselves replaced by the next run. And I think the next run is going to be entertainment attorneys, because a lot of people who left their agencies because they were part of the Writers Guild strike and started using entertainment lawyers, that's going to come back in. That goes in and out of cycles as well. And it also means that the Harvard MBA class is probably going to be gone, which is great also. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. What can the entertainment industry do without theatrical? This is an unbelievable disaster that COVID has stopped the world of theatricals. And this is kind of complicated because there's a lot of people who said, well, theatrical hasn't really been the main side of the business for a long time. It's always been on the ancillaries. It's always been on the other stuff that surrounds a film. Yes, but the theatrical release drove everything else. By and large, okay, yes, there was a ton of Game of Thrones stuff that came out of something that was originally on HBO. But at the same time, look what happened as soon as that went away, right? As soon as HBO blew the last season of that. But when we look at what's going on without theatrical, we're now missing the ability for a film to have a promotional plan that starts at least half a year, if not a whole year, before the movie was released into theaters. And that meant in-theater ads, that meant pre-movie previews, where you could take an audience who was, shall we say, indifferent to a movie coming out, to getting them excited over the course of time. And an important element of that was the reaction of other people in the audience as a trailer would come out, because someone who is marginally interested in seeing Avengers Endgame and thought, oh no, another Marvel movie. And by the time the film came out, after seeing movies in theaters and hearing the enthusiasm, they might now be a customer. In fact, they most likely would be, because that audience excitement drove it. YouTube channels promoting a film do not equal that, and certainly for avid moviegoers to fall out of the habit of going a couple of times a month is absolutely toxic for the future, because that means they have no anticipation for anything that's coming out. And it's very easy when you have no anticipation, when something does come out, you don't care. Look at what happened with Tenet. The reason Tenet went down in a shower of feathers is because a Christopher Nolan movie requires a lot of advanced prep on the part of the audience in order for it to be willing to accept the kind of weirdness and structure and in narrative style that your average Christopher Nolan movie has in it. And without that, coming from the big cities and moving in to the flyover country audience, meant that when that movie was released in basically a flyover country, no one was ready for it. No one was prepped for the kind of narrative innovation it would have. There was no support for people who were initially confused. So the thing died. And now you're talking about $200 million pissed away. Look at what happened with Mulan. Now, we all know that Mulan would never have been a success, because here you're making a movie in China, supposedly to appeal to Chinese audiences, but with an American slant on absolutely every aspect of the film's production. I mean, talk about your arrogance and your colonialist attitudes. What made Americans think that you can take a Chinese legend, shoot it incorrectly? Because I'm sorry, no matter how much research you do into another country, the people in that country are going to see every single thing you did wrong, or every single emotional inflection that you didn't get quite right. And sure enough, because of the changes they made, it wasn't going to appeal to the US either. You cut out the songs, you cut out the drama. What's left of the movie? You've compromised a vision on something that needed to not be compromised. Because as much as Hollywood would, or New Hollywood would like to believe that content doesn't matter, it's all about the marketing, it's all about the bling, it's all about making sure that people who criticize the movie get banned off of YouTube. It's not about any of that. It's about, you have to appeal to your core audience first, and then it expands outwards. It makes no sense to make a movie where the core audience is going to reject it and then expect the rest of the world to pick up the slack. So here we have a movie that, had it had a theatrical in the US and Europe, that was even marginal, because you were able to create such great trailers that people, in spite of their best instincts, said, I may go see this. The way it had worked with Aladdin, right? And obviously it didn't work with Lady and the Tramp, otherwise we would have made it a Disney Channel original. But they didn't have that. So now you have a movie that they made a big hole in $200 million, and we'll never see that again. And so the loss of the theatrical has kind of been picked up in certain areas where you have these pop-up drive-ins. Now this is good, because it's appealing. Drive-in appeals to an audience who goes to a movie because it's a social event, as opposed to an artistic one, where it's a chance to get together with your friends and have something to talk about, because you're all sick and tired of talking about Marsha and the Piggly Wiggly. You have an audience that is enjoying the actual event of going out, and so the drive-in is good for that. And I'm glad they're doing it. I'm glad it's working in a lot of places. That might be the way that industry rebuilds. I also think there's an opportunity for independent filmmakers who are making films specifically for the US and specifically for a niche group within the US. If they do it for the right amount of money, i.e. not $50 million plus, but something that's more modest, I think you can have another film renaissance coming, just like you did in the 60s and 70s, with all those low budget movies, whether they be blaxploitation, whether they be dubs of Chinese movies, the movies that were coming in as drive-in theater fodder, or the four-wallers, the things like Billy Jack, where an independent producer would go in and they would buy the theater and pay a rental for it, and split the concessions with the house, and take the remainder of the gate as their profit. That worked beautifully for things like Macon County Line and Billy Jack and Legend of Boggy Creek. There's no reason why that kind of entrepreneurism and focus on a niche with the right budget level can't come back, because that's actually what YouTube is doing too. Okay, now let's go to the big disasters. There's two big disasters that are going on right now. One of them is Disney, which, because it doesn't have the $30 million coming in a day from the parks, now there's scrutiny on its operations, which, quite frankly, under Iger have sucked. And why have they sucked? Because Bob Iger is a great Wall Street guy. He knows how to build a company by getting rid of the competition by buying it, such as buying Fox. The problem with that is that you can only get so big before you become unmanageable. And not only do you become unmanageable, but the moment something starts falling apart and you don't have your operations straight, there's no way to fix it. We see that in areas of the Disney empire that were allowed to run amok. Most clearly, what was going on at Lucasfilm, where you had an absolute destruction of of the original core Star Wars audience. And you had Kathleen Kennedy, who was running all this, shooting her mouth off saying, well, those people are all dying, and who cares about the old stuff? We're going to make Star Wars for the Force is female. What an idiot that was. And no one stopped her. And in fact, she's still there. And she's gone on and done other things like bringing in Leslie, whatever her name is, and insisting that when they were trying to do Galaxy's Edge, that they base it all on the new on the new sequel trilogy. I mean, just addle-brained, egocentric craziness that Iger, had he been aware of what was going on operationally, would have shut down. Ditto for Marvel. Now, the Marvel movies have been doing fantastic, but, and this is a huge but, their comic book side, which was supposed to drive the next run of franchises, has failed. None of their new stuff is working. So they're getting rid of everybody there, and now they don't really have content. And so what are they doing? They're saying, okay, we're going to put it all on Disney Plus. Well, Disney Plus has, while it has a decent amount of subscribers, that's 75 million because of stunting. You got Mandalorian, which is driving a lot of that, and you had that one-off of Hamilton. But the problem with Disney Plus is it is missing a big gap in the audience as a whole. Now, if you happen to have kids at the Disney age, which is somewhere between 5 and maybe 14, 15, great. If you're a grandparent and you got a lot of extra cash because you're retired and you have Disney Disney Plus at your home, great. And you're sitting there watching the one and only original Family Band and remembering that you had a crush on John Davidson at one point, fantastic. But for the average couple or single who's between about age 18 to 40, who does not have kids in that target age, outside Mandalorian, what does Disney Plus have for you? Can we say nothing? So why would you keep it? And now churn is much easier on the consumer level. Not like the old days when you have to call the cable company and finally get through, and then say, I really want to cancel HBO. And at the end of an hour and a half of doing this, you're so disgusted that you almost say, just I'll keep it. I'll keep it. It's only $10 a month, and this is too much frustration for me. No, now all you do is click cancel. So they're going to get a lot of churn in that age bracket. And that's not good, because that's the age bracket that is the most likely to be able to drive your future successes. So they're having a problem there. And the fact that the parks haven't been able to open means that Disney is still hemorrhaging cash. They've used a lot of the money that they've been borrowing to do a stock buyback. They fired, almost 30,000 people, most of them from the parks. But their long-term prospects, because their operations are screwy, is a lot less stable. Right now, they're okay because they're still hegemonic within the industry. But their time to turn stuff around internally getting short. And the failure of Mulan, not look good, not a good look. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Now, Warner Brothers is another big disaster that's happening. You know that AT&T is looking at this company and going, what is wrong with you? Why are you making the decisions you're making? Why did you screw up Batwoman, Supergirl? Not really, because that lasted a number of years. And something like Nancy Drew. How can you screw up this stuff? How did you screw up Game of Thrones? How is it that you're messing up in almost every area with your DC universe? What's going on? And I'm sorry, but the executives looking sad doesn't quite cut it. So we're going to see a lot of bloodletting at Warner Brothers, and I'm not seeing a lot of upside for them at the moment. So the other studios like Universal, they lost their head, couldn't keep it in his pants. Stop it, executives, just stop it. Okay, we know you think you're a master of the universe. Stop it. There for over 30 years, and then you blow it this way. Anyway, at least they have good operations. At least their corporate owner understands, Comcast understands the issue of content. You would think AT&T would with its cable systems, but apparently they don't. You look at Sony. Sony has still been doing very well with its downsizing, not officially, but unofficially, in terms of focusing on their areas that are making a lot of money, allowing the craziness that's going on in Japan to work itself out. So they seem to be fine. Paramount is still a mess. But we'll hope that they get some new management in there. They are right on track to becoming a mini major as opposed to a major. And MGM, if they keep it up with what's going on with their relaunching of the female 007 idea, you've already seen that didn't work. Why did you bring it back? Do you really want to go out of business? Is everyone just tired of trying to make money? Okay, do you. The other thing that has come up, and that is an article that was in the New York Post that pointed out that today's moviegoers have no interest in Hollywood's past, that only about 20% of the millennial and Zoomers even bother with old stuff. And they're making a big thing that seems to be a big anti-millennial push as usual. I'm going to say this is not an article that came from the New York Post. I think that this is an article that instead came from management at the big studios. Because if you want to be honest about it, this number hasn't changed in 50 years. When I was going to film school in the early 80s, people were complaining about it at the time that oh, the younger generation doesn't care about older movies. They can't stand watching black and white, yada, yada, yada. And I'm going to bet that 20 years before that, or maybe 15 years before that, when Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg and all of them were in their formative years, and watching a lot of old movies on TV, I bet that their friends thought that they were nuts. So this has been something that's been ongoing since time immemorial. The older generation always complains about the younger generation disregarding their elements of the past while forgetting that they disregarded the past as well. Being a connoisseur of older movies and older TV shows and all of that tends to be an older person thing. And it's not only nostalgia, it's that as you get older, you get tired of all the new stuff because you've seen it. And then you start going backwards and starting to see stuff that's a little bit different. And I'm sure that will happen to this generation as well. The reason I think that was planted by one of the studios is that they're really disgusted with the fact that their new stuff isn't working. If your new stuff isn't working, and there's a chance that your younger viewers might go to the older stuff, you want to stop that from happening. Saw it happen in the music industry, and we're seeing them still reeling from the fact that there's far more younger people today who will listen to the music that was contemporaneous when I was growing up than when I was at my age. And even though I was one of those freakish people who like the older stuff, that it would have been like my age in the early 80s, being someone who was listening to Frank Sinatra and Doris Day. So you've got that going on. So I'm not worried about that, but I do think it's unusual that article happened to appear at a moment when new content is facing such a challenge. And going back to old content, let's face it, MeTV and a lot of these other these other quasi curated channels are actually doing much better than they should be, especially among younger viewers. So there's that. The long and short of all of this is that the industry is in a period of chaos right now. Fortunately, a lot of the physical side, the dealing with COVID on the practical level is being worked out. So that's a good sign for the future. On the bad side, you still have a lot of the Wall Street mentality that's not interested in content per se. They're interested in what looks like a safe business plan. And that's already blown up. So trying to double down and go back in is wrong-headed. I do feel that there's an opportunity for younger entrepreneurs who are coming in to take advantage of the industry saying, we want more distinct voices, we want more diversity, and not just Harvard MBA diversity or white female diversity, but real across the board diversity of all sorts of different voices who aren't expected to perform on an international level, but to create a groundswell within a smaller community and then have it explode outwards. Think of it as my big fat Greek wedding and stuff like that on steroids. I do feel that that's where the industry is going. I do feel there's a lot of hope for people who are looking to break in right now. And I certainly hope that if you have had any time where you're not working 24/7, that you have been working on your creative stuff, because as much as I hate to say it, a lot of it is just doing it until you get it right. And that old thing about needing 10,000 hours, it's kind of true. Anyway, this is why we're living in interesting times, especially relative to what's going on in the entertainment industry. And I think the fact that the industry has survived a lot of bad stuff, wars, depressions, changing demographics, other stuff like that, they'll do it again. And that's the fun of Hollywood, after all.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.